I thought I'm late to the party.
You're not late. No. We're just letting people in. And we were just having some inspirational music there to break our day up and just to feel a little bit better about ourselves. So we'll just, if anybody is new into the room, just want to pop your name and your role in the chat, that'd be really helpful. Just give it another couple of minutes. Declan, how many people we've got in the room?
We have 23.
Okay. We won't have anybody lurking in a different room, potentially.
Not that I'm aware of, no. I've checked all the links already.
Okay. Right, so people are just popping the names in the chat. Brilliant. Lovely. Welcome everybody. So I think we'll make a start because we've got quite a lot to get through. So thank you everybody for coming today to our next webinar, which is looking at clinical leaders' role in research, documentation, safety and governance, and the community of practice leaders that we've got here today are myself as Nichola Verstraelen, Anthony Jemmott, Claire, Gabriel, and we've got Chrissie Minnis, who's welcome today, who's one of our pharmacy leads. So we hope that we have lots of interaction today. So, feel free to pop your hand up, talk to us at any point throughout the session, and or pop any questions in the chat. And we do have a Slido, if it works, where we can get hopefully some feedback from the audience as we go along. So next slide, Declan. Just to let everybody know as well that we are recording the session, and these sessions are then placed on the Futures NHS webinar, the web page, where you can view the previous webinars and lots of other resources in there. So the agenda, we're going to give you some presentations today by showcasing some various things, and then we're going to hear some real life experiences of good communication, and we want that discussion with the wider group. And we love this photograph here from Capo, which is research is everybody's business, isn't it? So that's the theme of our webinars, trying to enable and embed research and innovation within clinical practice, clinical and care practice. So next slide, please. So just a reminder, this is the web page, the Futures NHS web page, where you can find many, many resources that have been developed over the last couple of years to help give ideas or stimulate thoughts around how you might put things in place within your department or your service to help bridge that gap between clinical research. And today's session, we're talking about communication documentation, and I've just highlighted there the research delivery section, which is the most relevant to what we're talking about today, because we need to communicate between the clinical care world and the research world to be able to make it safe for patients. So next slide, please. So the theme of the session today, as I said, is about documentation and communication between the research teams and the clinical teams. And put a lovely little picture there of a child with a gap in his teeth there, highlighting that there is sometimes a gap between the clinical or care world and the research world. And I've just highlighted some quotes that some of us as research staff come across, and in relation to that communication. So okay, that's the research team's responsibility, when we're thinking about our care in our ward or area or in our care environment. Okay, that's to do with the research team, that's nothing to do with us. Other things that we might hear is, oh, I didn't really know what to do when it came to looking at that particular thing with the research study and the care of my patient today. I didn't really know what to do. Okay, so how do we then ensure that we can bridge that gap and understand that the clinical and care world know what to do with regards to the research study. Another thing that some of us may have heard over the years is from a clinical member of staff, the most important thing is getting the patient discharged to the other hospital. I assume that the research team will pick this up on Monday. So that is something that we see regularly, and we want to look at how, working with you in the clinical and care world, as to how we can bridge that gap together and make that communication seamless, because obviously the patients or clients that the research staff deliver research care to are your patients in the clinical world. We are giving care just as much as you're giving care, so we want to really look at bridging that gap. Next slide. So what sort of touch points are we talking about when we're discussing documentation and communication between the two worlds? So this could be admission. Are you thinking about, is this patient on a research study when they're admitted to the hospital or care place? At discharge, are you thinking about, oh right, is that patient on a research study? What do we need to do around that? Medication rounds, ward rounds, safety huddles, team meetings, MDT meetings, handover, liaising with the research teams, liaising with research champions, incident reporting, risk assessments, SBAR, emergency situations, PSERF, daily documentation. So there's many routes where that could potentially fall down or be raised, and bridging that gap if we can ensure that our processes are correct between the different departments. Next slide. Oh, it's just gone a little bit funny again. So I suppose what we are saying, obviously, we've got research and clinical staff in the community practice leadership group, and in the room today, hopefully we've got plenty of clinical staff. But what we want to say is that the research teams are always here to support the clinical teams, and we have different ideas and different ways that we can help bridge that gap. We want to understand what works best for you, really, and we want your ideas on how we can align that. So although I gave those quotes and comments of things that we do here, this is the place where we can look at bridging that gap and bringing the clinical and research world together. Next slide. So this is just a slide just to highlight for any nurses and midwives out there, but I'm sure in the other professional groups as well, you'll have similar things. Communication documentation is relevant to all of our professions. So the code says that we need to keep our colleagues informed when you're sharing the care of individuals with other health and care professionals and staff. So having that in your mindset when you're delivering care and you have somebody that's on a research study, should be really, really key thinking about. Next slide. We will always bring this in because the CQC, our inspectors, look at whether we are safe, we're effective, we are well led and responsive to people's needs and caring. So there is research within the CQC inspections, and a CQC inspector would like to see that the department is well led. So that includes having oversight of the processes, the governance for the service, which ensures that patients are safely managed. So as leaders out there, I'm sure you are supporting lots of different things around the care that your patients receive in your department. So research is also part of that. So what we are trying to highlight here is that leaders also need to understand what research is happening within their department, so that they can ensure that documentation and communication is seamless. So next slide. So I think what I've just said there really is related to this slide as well. So where all of this work commenced from initially was the Matrons Handbook, which tells matrons, and we've also got a ward leaders one and an exec nurse one, but helps staff understand how they can do their role. So within the CQC leadership requirements part of the Matrons Handbook, it says that matrons should maintain clear lines of accountability for quality of care, and ensure that there's easy access to accurate data and learning from errors, concerns and incidents. So this is all highly relevant for studies that are being delivered in a clinical environment as well. You as a matron, or you as a ward leader or a sister or a charge nurse or a leader of a service, how do you know that your clinical staff are making sure that if there's anything gone wrong with the patient that's on a research study in your environment, how do you know that your processes are working from that clinical perspective and not just that the responsibility lies with the research team, because they're everybody's patients, and you as a matron are overseeing the care of those patients in your department. So we want to bridge that gap between research and clinical again. Next slide. So we're trying to think, okay, how can we highlight where this is relevant in the clinical world? So there's a number of points in care that we need to do some things a little bit different. So you might have to do extra bloods, for example, on a patient that's on gentamicin, to watch for toxicity. Or if you're doing compression bandaging, obviously you've got to be careful with anybody that's got diabetes. So, in a sort of mental health situation, if somebody's receiving intense CBT, you need to be watching out for potentially that they could have increased chances of suicide intention or ideation. So there's a number of points of care where sometimes we just think, okay, I know we're delivering this piece of care, we need to do something a little bit different. So it's exactly the same in research. If we are giving a medicine that's a research medicine, or we're giving an intervention, whether it's a brace or psychological therapy or whatever it is, we just need to do something a little bit more special, and ensure that we not necessarily understand the whole protocol and the whole study, because that's not necessarily your role, but that who the research team is, and how to contact them, and where to get the right things for that patient in regards to that study. So if there was a member of staff or a group of members of staff, for example, that weren't doing those extra bloods for the patients that are on gentamicin, for example, you as a leader would have to look, well, what's going on in my department? Why is the policy not being followed? Why is the pro formas not being followed? So you would investigate and look at that. So we want to ensure that autonomy and I suppose that responsibility of looking at the research side of things is also jointly led by the leaders of our departments and our services. So yeah, research interventions are basically just another part of care or treatment. Just like you'd be giving an antibiotic, you would potentially be giving a medication that's on a trial, or the research team would be giving a medication on a trial. But your staff are overseeing any of the side effects or anything that happens with that patient. So we'll go through some of the examples of where that may go wrong as we go forward. Next slide. So I've just threw in some examples here of where we have got good communication points. So this particular organisation, it's electronic patient records. So on admission, the question is always there on their pro forma. Is the patient participating in a research trial, and what is the trial name or the drug name? So that is highly relevant if somebody's on a cancer trial, for example, and they come in with some serious side effects. That is highly relevant to the patient's care, and not just on admission, throughout the whole of their care period, because that might trigger that you have to speak to the research team because the patient's been admitted, and then we need to speak to the sponsor, etc., etc. And I'm sure Chrissie will go over that as we go forward. Next slide. Oh, again, it's gone a bit funny, but that says the Cardex. So obviously, daily documentation of what's going on with the patient. Make sure that research is part of your pro forma of your Cardex, and that research staff are able to document in that. So it's all part of the same care. So the research staff can document, and the clinical staff can document at the same time, and you can all see what's happening as part of their care. Next slide. Again, it's gone a bit funny, but that's SBAR. So this is, handing over. So is that triggered on your documentation for handing patients over? So I've seen a number of different documentations in different organisations over the years, and you might use the SBAR, but will you remember that research is part of that? So is it loud and clear on there that this patient is on a research study? It might be that that trial is actually causing the issues as why that patient's in hospital. So it needs to be there loud and clear. So if you're going along thinking about your documentation, are you able to make sure that research is right up there? Next slide, please. So this is an example of a ward leader thinking about handover or perhaps a safety huddle. So, you know, you've got all the patients listed on the left-hand side. You've got all of the things that you need to think about as part of their care. So you know, we're suggesting, and this happens in some areas, that there's also the column on research. So as you can see, if you're going through the ward, Sarah is on the C32PO trial, whereas Claire, she's going for an angio that day, but you know, if the angio is positive, that they may be suitable for the trial, so contact the research nurse. Whereas Christine needs research meds to be sent to the next hospital. They're going to be discharged to the next hospital. So what do you need to do? You need to contact the research nurse and pharmacy. Whereas Carl is eligible for an outpatient physio study. So, you know, you need to be thinking about contacting the team to see whether they can go on that study. Anthony was found to be ineligible for a trial through the research team. We're not saying that you necessarily have to screen that patient to see whether they're suitable for the trial, but the research team may have been that day and said they're not eligible for the trial, but we know that there are other things that patients can sign up for if they're willing, such as be part of research. There may be other studies in the future that they could sign up to. Whereas Nichola is a sleep outpatient, and her partner has asked if he could speak to the research team about a study. So all of these things are really highly relevant to embedding and enabling research within clinical practice. Next slide. So I'm just going to hand over now to Anthony, who is a community mental health matron, and he's going to talk to you about his experiences.
Thank you very much. I did send one slide for Declan to put up for me. I don't know if that's able to be done. Yep.
Live television.
Thanks very much. So thanks for that. Just to follow on from what Nichola said, when I was given the brief on what I needed to talk about today, the questions was about how the leader of a development can ensure that staff are aware of research. And this sort of diagram came into mind when looking at the triangulation of care, linking it to research. So it's about thinking of the service user being the center. That hasn't changed of the care that we deliver, and looking at all the various components. So for example, within the team or the teams that I am aligned to, I work very closely with the research team. Before any trials are implemented within the clinical area, I will get the research team to come and present to the zoning meetings that will take place within the community, have it on the agenda, have clinicians to be aware of what the research is about, how it would benefit their service users. So it's about looking at making research part of that care, part of their care plans. Actually, we are using Dialogue Plus at the moment in terms of our care planning, and it's how you actually embed all of these things within the care plan to make it business as usual, basically. Not that's something different from the work that we do clinically. So looking also at patient safety, incidents, PSERF, how do we embed it and make it as part of PSERF? So to show our evidence base in terms of our practice. If there an incident occurs, how we can use research to actually inform the learning of that incident and taking that forward. We also have things like after action reviews from incidents that we would look at and embed that and link that to the research that the research team may have carried out, and that will involve the clinicians. So it's about having, say for example, when we have thematic reviews on cases and incidents that may be happening, how we actually involve the research team with the clinician in that round table discussion of the learning, and things like rapid response huddles. And it's also making sure that you be inclusive, including the managers, service managers, team managers, and as Nichola alluded to just now, the relatives. That's really important. I think it's a part of research sometimes we don't see enough of, particularly within mental health. I think we need to think about how we get the relatives on board also. Quality and safety, Nichola, I've touched on that. It's part and parcel of what we need to be doing as matrons. It is part of the agenda for the CQC. So we need to be linking that to our quality safety meetings. So what I do, I will invite the research team and get a slot within the quality safety meetings where you have the right people around the table could influence those changes in actually embedding research and sort of strengthening the links between the clinical team and the research team. And it's about making sure that you are actually talking to the right people in order for these things to happen. So that's about it actually in terms of um, my take on this. So it's about triangulation of care research, basically, and but still making sure the service user is center of that care and that research. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Anthony. I like that. Yeah, business as usual is the message of the day. So please, clinical teams, how we can tell us how you can make it business as usual. Declan, do you want to just pop onto the other slide set? And welcome, Claire.
Thanks, Nichola. So this really follows on quite nicely with Anthony's presentation. So I'm Claire Gabriel, and I'm a team lead for a clinical trials delivery team. So we were running a trial in critical care. So we followed the steps that Anthony has just talked about engaging the team, making sure that they were aware of the trial, that they knew, all the processes that were involved in the trial and the intervention, because we were asking them to take a sample of blood for us. But this is agreed that this is the best way forward for a critical care trial, because the patients have arterial lines, and it was thought it was better from an infection control perspective, and also to make sure that people had their competencies, that the critical care staff would take the sample of blood rather than the research nurses being trained up to do that sort of ad hoc, and every now and again perhaps it wouldn't have been sorry, excuse me, the best idea. So that's what we did. So we had the engagement of all the critical care team. We did lots of education events, going to speak to them, trying to get all different staff at different times of the day, etc., to make sure they were aware of the trial. And then we went ahead. But we next slide, please, Declan. So if you see in the middle of the screen there, there's they're not very clear, I'm sorry, next to the bed icon, there is a sort of poster that sits in every cubicle for critical care patients who are on the trial. It's just a reminder to the bedside nurse that their patient is on the trial. So they're prompted to take a blood sample when necessary. But they highlighted a problem to us, that when the patients were then transferred to a ward, which could be anywhere in the hospital, how would we communicate out of hours that the patients were on the trial? So we put together a handbook, a handover book, really. So you can see different pictures there. There's diagrams, driver diagrams to describe the processes of taking the samples, pictures of the samples and the boxes, and a how to fill in the samples, and some guidelines as to when the samples need to be taken and where they need to go. Oh, sorry. And we found that really effective, because it was a big ask for a member of the quick care team to have an extended handover and explain the trial in detail to a member of the ward team who wasn't aware. And of course, the patients could be sent anywhere in the hospital, so it was not possible for us to go and do the same sort of education and engagement with everyone across the trust. So just a simple idea, but that's worked really well for us, and it is about simplifying communication and explaining things to people that will be involved in the care of that individual. Thanks, Nichola. I think that's it. Thanks. Oh, sorry, one more slide. And just to note, the other thing that worked really well was, and again, this picks up nicely with what Nicola and Anthony have said, is on the daily safety brief, there is a section there to ask whether or not a patient is eligible for the trial. So it's highlighted on the ward rounds in the morning, and then they contact the research team if there's any patients that are eligible for the trial. So that just helps with communication between the two teams as well. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks a lot. That's great. Some great examples of it in practice. Chrissie, we're going to move on to you.
Thanks, Nicola. Thanks, Claire. So just in terms of my role, my name's Chrissie Minnis, and I'm one of the clinical trial lead pharmacists based at Lancashire Teaching Hospital. So I'm very much involved in the research delivery side of our clinical trial service and supporting our early phase clinical trial facility based at Lancashire Teaching Hospitals. So and as it's kind of following the same points as Claire in terms of communication and understanding our input into how we can support our clinical teams in ensuring we clarify and confirm patients that are on research studies. So if you look at some of the digital platforms that we have in place, as Nicola showed a little bit earlier in the presentation, those kind of key links at point of admission, are we asking the right questions to our patients, to our service users, checking if they're taking part in a research study, and using those digital platforms to help support safety netting. So referring to our colleagues within our pharmacy teams and across our nursing team to ensure, where appropriate clinically, patients continue on investigational medicinal products if it's appropriate for them to continue. We've actually had a case this week, a really good case example of where these safety nets that are put in place to ensure that patients that are admitted to hospital unwell, potentially due to a treatment they're on as part of a research study, is escalated and they're escalated and responded to appropriately. And then we can make that assessment as to whether or not we need to unblind. So if it's a randomised control trial, for example, whether we need to unblind that participant for their safety and ensure that we can support their clinical management plan. And in that situation, we actually did unblind the patient and we were able to review and follow up, and it's that quick thinking within our clinical teams to identify a point of admission who needs to be involved in that individual's care, which is a really good example of sharing that communication across our handovers. So in terms of ensuring clarity and continuation of investigation of medicinal product suppliers, whether that's unlicensed or licensed medicinal products used in trial, I've just used an example here of a prescription chart that we actually have an active study at the moment at Lancashire Teaching Hospitals. That's our TITCH3 study. So it's an infusion of tranexamic acid in subacute spontaneous intracerebral hemorrhage. And it's just a really good example of where we can use the platforms that we have in place in clinical care to make it really clear that patients are on research trials. So we can actually build templates within our prescriptions to ensure that it's obvious. So you can see in brackets there, it says clinical trial. We've supported our clinical teams with this particular study and understand those that need to be involved from a blinding and unblinding perspective as well. And then we can schedule the treatment. So we can use those prompts to ensure that where necessary, we are referring to the right people involved in that individual's care to support them. Also on the slide here, it just gives an example of where, and just reinforcing the message really that research is front and centre if it's appropriate for patients to continue on research medication when they're admitted to secondary care. And if those medicines are admitted, why they're admitted. So the scheduling, you'll see there, it actually records through our system at Lancashire Teaching Hospital as blue if that medicine's been admitted. And we want to understand a reason why that's been admitted. Investigational medicinal products are critical medicines as well. And there's also different aspects of that individual's care. So it's just really important for us to ensure that we are having those conversations and we're supporting our clinical teams with those education points where necessary. Thanks, Nicola.
Brilliant, thank you. That's brilliant. And I think on our Futures NHS webpage, there's a couple of scenarios there that explain some of those real safety implications if we don't follow this schedule. So, you know, if something hasn't been administered, for sure the sponsor will have something to say about it, because obviously that patient has signed up to that trial in good faith that they will receive what they have signed up for. And so, you know, although it obviously the research team are overseeing the study, if the ward staff or the care staff are administering the medication, there's a sort of safety breach there from a research perspective, and there's all sorts of paperwork that needs to be done. But most importantly, the patient, if they are not receiving that medication or that intervention, you know, there could be some serious things that could happen there. So yeah, just trying to highlight that as to how do we ensure? I think we all been there. You know, I've been a nurse on the ward, and you know, you're busy enough doing the medication round and getting the antibiotics ready, and you know, all of the things that go with it. And you know, you come to something that you're unfamiliar with. Now, you know, I get it that you don't want to do anything unsafe. So, but it's just thinking about, okay, right, I don't feel confident to give it because I don't know, you know, I haven't read Claire's pack, or I haven't, you know, been involved in the training or anything like that. So what do I do? Okay, first things first, I contact the research team, or if it's an IMP, even contact the pharmacy, you know, to get that advice as to what needs to be done, and then document around that so that you can see, okay, you've done everything that you can to ensure that patient has received the intervention and whatever it is. So it's just having that awareness that it is part of clinical care, not just the research team's care, because we can't be there 24 hours a day. Next slide. I think I've got a scenario here now, so a bit of thinking time. So we'd like you to raise your voice, speak, pop it in the chat, whatever you think. But scenario here is a patient has got mild Alzheimer's disease with capacity 90% of the time. Is on a research trial with a new oral medication, C32PO, which they take with their usual standard medication, donepezil. The research medications are prescribed 4 times a day and are kept in the research cabinet on the ward. This lady has been on the orthopaedic ward and has been transferred to an elderly care ward pre-discharge. All of her standard medications have been brought across with her except the research medications, which are still locked in the research cabinet on the orthopaedic ward. And it's time for the medication, it's due. So I'd like some conversations with the audience. What would you do in this situation? And I probably gave the answers away before. And what are the consequences if this patient does not get their study medication? So anybody willing to speak up here? And also thinking around, how do we ensure that this sort of communication channel is improved in the future? Susan.
Basically, I would contact the orthopaedic ward and see whether we could come and collect the research drugs from them so that they still get the medication.
Yeah.
I would document it in the patient's documentation, and I would also flag it up as an issue with the ward that they should have been sent over with the patient when they left as part of the discharge summary. So as a ward manager to a ward manager, I would flag it up with them and ask them to make sure the staff are aware that they need to make sure that if they're on a research study, the drugs are brought over with them as well.
Absolutely brilliant, yeah. And going back to that documentation thing that we had at the beginning, if you had that at the discharge touch point, you know, has the research medication gone with them? You know, that would stop that from happening, wouldn't it? And you know, this absolutely happens. You know, in COVID times, patients were transferred to other hospitals, other ICUs, and the medication didn't go with them. And yeah, so yeah, if anybody could think of any other ideal scenarios, or Karen, you're on mute.
Yeah, hi. Just checking
Hi.
I wasn't on mute. So that was a perfect answer. I would just add as well, from a research point of view, that we'd need to let the research team know if the medication hadn't been given, as it needs to be reported. So it would be, I suppose, to ensure that staff have that. What we've done is we have research folders on every ward with the contacts of key research staff, so that if anything happened on your ward that you weren't sure about, just give one of those people a call, and then they can come and make sure that study documentation is up to date and sponsor is informed if medication has been missed.
Absolutely brilliant answer again. And thinking about, you know, it's not necessarily an incident, it's a near miss maybe, you know, because they might get it, you know, just maybe a little bit later than usual. But, you know, thinking about your risk management incident processes, I suppose, around this. And, you know, I'm a research matron by trade, so, you know, I would be looking at how we learned from that. And how we might then speak to the managers there to ensure that they're overseeing their staff and at discharge that it doesn't happen again, because, you know, it could potentially happen again, and because these things happen, patients move from ward to ward all the time, don't they? So, you know, I would then like to sit down with the ward manager there and look, okay, right, how can we make this better for the future? And, you know, research isn't simple. There's all sorts of different scenarios. I mean, this could be, I mean, looking at the number C32PO, it's likely that is a medication that's not licensed yet, whereas there are medications that are licensed. You know, it could be gabapentin or something that they're trialing against something else. But if it is, you know, it has to be very much controlled. It might not be that you're allowed to just bring it from that box in the orthopedic ward to the next ward, and it might be that we've fallen down because you need a locked cupboard on the elderly ward or the other wards, and it might be that the research team need to put something in place, the pharmacy team, for that scenario in the future. So there are actually loads of different things to think about in relation to that, but I think the most important thing is speaking to the research team. Sue?
It's understanding as well, it's making sure that the staff on the care of the elderly ward understand that it's a research specific drug and they can't just take it. So say for instance they are using a comparator which has got a license, it could be that they just take it from normal stock and they don't know that actually whether it's a placebo or whether it's the real drug, and a whole ream of complications then, because the patient's had a drug they shouldn't have had to start with, and two, they haven't had the medication, the trial drug that they should have had. And it can really, if there is a placebo involved and it's I don't know, say it's paracetamol versus a placebo and the person doesn't see that a placebo bit, they just give them the paracetamol and the patient was on the placebo, it opens up a whole ream of paperwork for the research staff that they don't want to complete. So it's really important that that message gets sent over, that these are patient specific and that they can only be given, that drug must only be given for research purposes. Yeah, I've been there, done that, and bought the t-shirt, and it's not good.
It's not great. And ultimately, again, like the patient signed up for that, and in the good faith that it will all be correct. They don't want to be getting an active medication when they should be on a placebo, because going from if you know, you've used the example of paracetamol, but it could be something a lot stronger than that. So you might be going from 0 to 100, and yeah, all sorts of things. So we've got Chrissie next. No, Claire, sorry, looking at the numbers.
It's all right. It's not a question. I just wanted to highlight, Rebecca had put in the chat that on the ward transfer checklist that it would be good to have research medication as one of those tick boxes, because the medication going with patients is on ward transfer checklist, isn't it? So that's a great idea if they include separately that research medication is on that checklist as well.
Absolutely brilliant. I think we could do with adding a list of things, of examples where ward leaders, ward managers, department leaders could ensure that is there. So some might be electronic, some might be paper, and it might be organisational led. So it might be that you need to speak to your digital lead nurse or digital lead or something like that can make sure that is put in place across the whole hospital. Brilliant idea there. Chrissie?
I was just going to comment on Sue's excellent comment around an understanding of interventional versus placebo medication. So a lot of the investigations we did for some of the incidents that occurred during the pandemic and the COVID-19 studies, when we had patients who were allocated a specific kit, so we didn't know whether they were on the interventional treatment or a placebo dummy medicine. And in some instances, we had to support some additional training for our clinical teams around medicines administration, because we noted that the same patient's medication bottle was being used to dose all the individuals within a specific day, for example. I will agree with the paperwork around that, looking at the root cause investigation and also the safety element aspect of it for patients as well. So it's just to reinforce the importance of that understanding really in education and safety for all our patients on investigation medicinal product medicines.
Brilliant. Ultimately, safety is key, isn't it? Anthony?
Thank you. I mean, it's just emphasizing what have been said and what you said earlier on, Nichola, and what we are trying to establish here, that what I am hearing is patient safety, patient-centered research care. If it wasn't a risk trial, we would have been having all these measures in place anyway, and why wouldn't we be doing it as business as usual, as I said earlier on? So, I think this really emphasizes the point of how we need to work more collaboratively with research and clinicians. So yeah, one of the things I was just wondering, just with my mental health hat on here, I noticed that with capacity 90% of the times, with a trial like these, would you be testing capacity, mental capacity, under the Mental Capacity Act 2005 on a continual basis before you administer this medication? It's just, I have to bring in the mental health bit. That's my bread and butter, I'm just curious, and it may not have the answer, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, curious. So it would vary for the study, but obviously you've got the Mental Capacity Act, and I'm not an expert by any means on this, for the clinical care. When you consent somebody with Alzheimer's onto a study, you obviously have to take in that into consideration in one way, but if they could vary in their capacity, but they have different sorts of consent forms for people that have capacity or don't. So, oh gosh, my memory fails me now. Consultee, is it? Consent or a relative? Sue might come in here and answer the question.
It's got to have specific ethical approval to use patients who might lack capacity. And because of that, they have specific get out of jail free cards, if you like, by using other forms of consent. So you can, if you have a participant that hasn't got capacity at that time, if the ethical approval allows, you can then use what they call a personal consultee, which might be a family member or somebody who knows their wishes and their beliefs well. Or you can use a professional consultee, which is somebody who's not directly involved in the research, but is involved in the patient's care, and they make a decision on the patient's best interests, really. But it all depends on what ethical approval you've got, and can that study be done in patients who have got? Does it have to be done in patients who don't have capacity, basically, or can we look at different ways of doing that study in patients that do have capacity? Obviously, if it's treating patients that don't have capacity, you don't have a choice. But yeah, there are different ethical approvals in place, and you would know all of that before you start the study, to be honest.
Thank you. Thanks. Interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And sometimes you find that people are thinking that they're protecting somebody with Alzheimer's by gatekeeping away from that research study. But ultimately, I've worked with many families that have been somebody that's had Alzheimer's disease, and that the family have absolutely benefited from being on the study, because they get extra support. Everybody gets extra support. Everything is looked at. You've got your health MOT and everything, and like Sue says, everything is ethically approved. You know, how else are you going to find out the answers to what is going to cure Alzheimer's disease without doing the research? And obviously they take into consideration if somebody doesn't have capacity, like you would do maybe in the Mental Capacity Act in terms of clinical care. But you know, what were their wishes, you know, before? Have they ever talked about being on research? They might have been a research professor, you know, before they developed the condition. And you know, do you think it's something that they would like to take part in, or have they always said, I'm never going to take part in research? You know, that's the sort of conversations that they have with family members, that, you know, it's not just a random consultee, that is all taken into consideration. But yeah, capacity does go up and down, and you know, if this was a clinical on a patient on a clinical ward and you had doubts, you know, about their capacity, or they were, you know, refusing medications, or, you know, giving you non-verbal signs that they didn't want to have their medication, you know, I would just again speak to the research team, get the PI, potentially the lead, to come and assess. And with all research, there's always the opportunity to either pull out or, you know, put it on hold, depending on whatever the situation is, because it's for the safety, for the care of the patient ultimately. You know, we would never be forcing anything with patients. So yeah, we do always take that bear that in mind, but ultimately just need to speak to the research team to see what their thoughts are. And yeah, if we were with you know, giving it a break, obviously we would just put that in the communication to the sponsor, and they would be able to see why as well. Claire?
Thanks, Nicola. And just to add also, there are scenarios that we see a lot with some of our stroke patients or critical care patients where they may lack capacity initially, and we do have families involved and they give permission, but somewhere down the line the patient then regains capacity, so that they have to then be consented as a regained capacity consent form. So that's important to note as well. So it is transient, as you've described, and we do ensure that we make sure that if they are able, they do get to speak for themselves, don't they, by doing the regained capacity consent.
Yeah, great point there. And then you've got the same for ICU patients potentially that are asleep in a coma when, you know, they're initially with the family consented, and then obviously they wake up and you reassess. It's personalised care at its best. So I mean, we have got a couple of survey questions, but I am quite interested if there's any clinical staff out there, or any of the research staff that work with the clinical teams, as to, have anybody got any examples of where documentation, communication is perfectly aligned? And I'm just waiting for the fanfare. Even if it's the smallest thing, please can you tell me about it? Can I pick on anybody in the clinical world? Sabrina, are you there? Silence. So has everybody left? Everybody must have left. Maybe we were talking to ourselves. Okay, so I mean, Karen.
I haven't really got you know, anything groundbreaking to share, but something that's just sprung to mind is we are going to electronic data records soon, and we were having issues on the ward because we're using paper and electronic, and we have now agreed we're not going to electronic till next year. So what we've done in the interim is we have a handover section for the research team to actually use, as well as other staff, and so to ensure that there is that handover if a patient goes from to a different ward. And also we have our own, well, under the specialist section, our own continuation sheets online. So it's just something that we hope will facilitate communication, across the wards. And I'm sure other trusts that have already gone electronic have got that, but it's just a great achievement for us because up to now we haven't had it. So that's just something that springs to mind.
Brilliant. Sue?
Yeah, just we utilised the alert system on our patient. We used the alert system, so if anybody had an alert, it would automatically flash up on the electronic documentation when to say that they had an alert and what the alert was. And we were able to utilise that for research participants. So every time somebody went on to that record, it flashed up they were on a research study and what the research study was and what it involved. Just that was part of our process when we recruited somebody to a research study. We made the alert go on the system.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We've also got that Lancashire Teaching under the allergies section, so it's loud and clear, red triangle. Rebecca?
Yeah, we're in a position in Sheffield where we're moving from one electronic patient record to another system where we're due to go live in October, and we're working very closely with our digital team to try and build a system that meets the needs of what we'd like it to for research patients. So we're still in very infant stages, but if we do have anything concrete from that, I'll be able to share that with the group.
That would be perfect. That would be really good, because you're at the right time to be able to get it there right from the beginning, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. I've written your name down so that we can communicate in the future. Who have we got? Claire.
Hi, I'm a research nurse in paediatric critical care at MFT. We are quite lucky that we've got some studies that are the clinical team can randomise the patients because they've done their site-specific training. So we do a lot of education in the background prior to the study starting. But what we utilise is our electronic patient record system. We can send messages directly to the staff. So we will be working from home and we'll just send a message specifically to that nurse to let them know this patient's in this study. It got randomised a couple of days ago. Let us know if you've got any problems, and they can communicate directly back to us. And that really works well to facilitate that communication.
Well, that would be really cool if we could all learn that. Yeah, we'd like to hear more. Please keep us informed. I'm going to write your name down as well. Karen, have you got something else?
No, I was just going to actually ask the lady before me, what is that you're using on to communicate with the ward staff?
So we have Epic here. So we've called it Hive at Manchester as a beehive. And we use the Hive chat so we can see which patient, who's actually in the care team looking after that patient. We can see the nurse and I can send a message directly to her.
That's great. Thank you.
Or him. Brilliant. Is there somebody else's hand up there? It's Claire again, wasn't it? You just still got your hand up. Okay, so I think I have got. Do you want to just move on to the next slide? I'm going to try and see. I'm a bit worried about this as to whether it'll work or not. But so we might just talk it through because we've only got 5 minutes left, and I think we have already talked through some of these questions really. So I think we'll just talk it through. So how can we ensure that information is communicated between clinical and research teams effectively within existing current communication channels? I suppose, and I'd like to send this survey out to the wider group really, and the people that weren't able to attend today, because we were talking about creating a bit of a list of things that people can, leaders can have a look at and think, right, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, just to help that embedding of research in clinical practice. So I think I'm going to send this survey out, and people can fill it in and we can get the data, because then we can pop, it's like co-producing something together that we can pop in our Futures NHS webpage under how do you improve documentation and communication between clinical and research teams. So has anybody got anything else that they want to say on this one? Nope. Oh, Sabrina. Hello, Sabrina.
Hi, sorry, earlier when I had received the call. I was going to say, obviously, effective handover, like a thorough handover between the two teams.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. And also, I was just going to ask, so if, let's say, I work in a community hospital, and I quite remember that a while back, the acute stroke unit wanted us to be involved in this clinical trial for some of the stroke patients. The only reason why we couldn't do it was because obviously they needed to be monitored. I can't remember what it was, but they needed to be monitored. And because we're a community hospital, we don't have a lot of facilities. So in that instance, what happens then? Obviously, if it's something that needs to be trialed, then what happens in that instance?
Yeah, well, that's part of the setup of a study, and as part of the capacity and capability as to whether it's feasible or not to work in certain environments, and it doesn't work in all areas. But I would say that research teams are quite problem solvers, and we do try and work out the ways for it to work, even if it's going back to the sponsor to say, look, it's not going to work. You need to change the protocol, and make it for a way that will work, because quite a lot of studies that you find are made for 24-hour care in an acute hospital, whereas that's not necessarily where these patients are always at. They could be out in the in primary care, out in the community, or like in a community hospital like yourself that hasn't got 24-hour or even resource, that sort of thing. So I would not just think, right, okay, let's just leave it. Let's speak to your research team about, is there any other way that we can set this up and make it work. So have you done any studies, Sabrina, in your wards?
No, the only studies that we did was, I think, during the COVID, was just trying to find out how people felt emotionally, and that was like a survey that was sent out to staff to sort of complete. So that was the only research that I was involved in, actually.
Yeah, and they are perfectly great studies to do as well. And I'm, there might be people on here that have said, well, we're not doing any studies in our department, but there are other ways that people can get involved in research, such as be part of research, join dementia research. They can sign up to that, and they might be sent information about studies that they can do online from home, or various things. So it's not just about studies that are being delivered in that area. There are other things out there. Declan, will you just move on to the last slide? So just go through that one, next one. I suppose we'll just conclude here by saying, what we're talking about here is culture. Just go back one, Declan. And so even if you go away and think, I can change our handover form, and that's the only thing I can do, that is brilliant, because small changes make a big difference. If you could do that in collaboration with the research team, talk about how it's going to work, then you are a great way to enabling and embedding research within the culture of your organisation. So thinking about your everyday processes, your pro formas, your systems, your electronic records, your paper records, and different professions have different records. It might be the AHPs have different records. Thinking about all of the touch points that we talked about, and what can you do as a leader to ensure that your staff are attending to that. And then just go on to the last slide, because we were at 3 o'clock. That's it, really. And I'll just say thank you for listening. And I think that we struggle to find clinical teams to highlight examples of how it absolutely works. That bridge between clinical and research, we struggle today, and I think that just highlights how we're not there yet at all. So we're all at the beginning of this journey of being able to do this. So I would love you to go away and have a think about how you might do that in your organisation. And please, could you send us examples of how it's going? So the MFT example in Manchester, really want to hear how that's going, because others will want to hear that as well, as to how they can do it in their organisation. So yeah, this is the start of the future. And thank you so much for listening. And we will see you next month. And I can't remember the date, but we will send you the date of the next presentation. It's on, Nick, can you remember?
7th of June.
7th of June. And what's it on?
Hybrid role, so looking at joint clinical and research roles.
Yeah. Was Emma putting your hand up there, or were you trying to clap as well? This often happens. So right, we'll see you next time. Thank you very much for listening.
See you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Nichola. Bye.